I had just moved into a new apartment, and money was tight. Most of my furniture was secondhand, and I needed a couch to make the place feel like home. A friend suggested Craigslist since you can find stuff cheap or even free. So one night, I was scrolling through listings when I saw an ad that caught my eye. Free couch, must pick up tonight. The picture showed a decent-looking brown leather couch. It wasn't perfect. There were some scuffs on the arms, but it was better than the futon I'd been sitting on for weeks. The description said the owner was moving the next day and needed it gone ASAP. I figured it was my lucky day. I messaged the seller right away. Within minutes I got a reply, still available. Come tonight, but it has to be before midnight. Address is redacted. Basement entrance is unlocked. Bring help if you need. It seemed straightforward, though the whole basement entrance thing felt a little odd. I tried not to overthink it. The guy was probably just busy packing for his move and didn't want to deal with carrying the couch upstairs. By the time I finished dinner, it was already close to 9 p.m. I grabbed my keys, hopped into my car, and followed the directions to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so. Most of the houses were dark, like everyone had gone to bed early. When I pulled up, I double-checked the address to make sure I had the right place. The house looked off. It wasn't run down exactly, but it had this neglected feel to it. The lawn was overgrown, and the porch light flickered weakly. There was no car in the driveway, no sign of anyone home. I sat in my car for a minute, debating whether to just leave, but then I noticed a faint light glowing from one of the basement windows. I took that as a good sign. Maybe the guy was down there, waiting for me to pick up the couch. So I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I knocked a few times, nothing. I was about to call the seller when I saw a note taped to the door. Basement entrance around back. Door is unlocked, come in. That uneasy feeling crept back, but I told myself it was fine. Some people just aren't good with social interactions, right? Maybe he was shy or in the middle of packing and didn't want to deal with face-to-face contact. I decided to just get the couch and get out. The backyard was overgrown, with weeds brushing against my legs as I made my way to the basement door. The door itself was old and heavy, with peeling paint and a rusty handle. When I pushed it open, it let out a loud creak. The smell hit me right away, a mix of damp earth, mold, and something metallic, something that made my stomach churn. I hesitated on the threshold, but then I saw the couch at the bottom of the stairs. It looked just like the picture, sitting there in the dim light of a single hanging bulb. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. No response. I took a few cautious steps down the wooden stairs, which groaned under my weight. The basement was cold and damp, with walls that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The closer I got to the couch, the more I realized something was off. The leather looked darker than it had in the picture, shiny, wet. I reached out and touched it, then jerked my hand back in horror. My fingers were covered in something sticky, something red, blood. Panic shot through me. I turned to run back up the stairs, but I froze when I heard a noise, a low, creaking sound, like someone stepping on an old floorboard. I looked up, and there he was. A man stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the faint light coming from outside. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty hoodie, and in his hand was a knife. I don't remember thinking. I just ran. I shoved past him on the stairs, nearly slipping on the slick blood. He swung the knife at me, but it missed, slicing through the air just inches from my face. I hit the basement door with my shoulder, throwing it open, and sprinted through the yard to my car. I didn't even stop to close the car door before starting the engine and peeling out of the driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I got home, I locked every door and window, then collapsed onto the floor, shaking. After a while, I decided to check Craigslist to see if the ad was still up. It was gone, like it had never existed. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to report what happened. I called the police and told them everything. They promised to send someone to check it out. Later that day, I got a call back. The officer said they found the house, but it was abandoned. No furniture, no lights, no sign of anyone living there. Just an empty basement with dark stains on the floor. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. I'm never using Craigslist again. I was looking for a part-time job to make some extra money. One night, I came across a Craigslist ad that sounded perfect. Night shift assistant needed. Cash for hours of work. no experience necessary. The ad didn't say much else, just that the job involved light cleaning and organizing inventory in a storage unit. The pay was more than fair, and I could use the cash, so I emailed the poster. The response came quickly, and it was brief. Meet me at PM at address. You'll need gloves. Everything else provided. Cash paid on the spot. The location wasn't far, a quiet industrial park on the edge of town. I figured the storage unit was owned by a small business that needed someone to do their dirty work. I'd heard of people hiring last-minute workers like this before. It seemed harmless enough. At 9:50, I pulled up to the address. The storage facility was gated, but the gate was open. Rows of identical metal units stretched out into the darkness, lit only by flickering overhead lights. The place felt deserted. The man from the ad was waiting near one of the units. He was tall, dressed in a heavy jacket with the hood pulled up, even though it wasn't that cold. His face was mostly hidden in shadow. He waved me over as I parked my car. "You're here for the job?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound confident. He nodded and handed me a pair of gloves. "Follow me." We walked to the storage unit. It looked like any other metal door padlock. He unlocked it, and I saw what was inside: dozens of large black garbage bags stacked neatly. The smell hit me right away, a sour, rotting stench that made my stomach turn. "What's in the bags?" I asked, holding my nose. "Don't worry about it," he said flatly. "Just move them to the truck." I looked over my shoulder and saw a white box truck parked a few feet away. Its back door was open, waiting for the bags. Something about this didn't feel right. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but $300 was a lot of money. I told myself it was probably food waste or something gross like that. Nothing illegal, right? I picked up the first bag. It was heavier than I expected. The plastic crinkled under my hands, and I thought I felt something soft and lumpy. I tried not to think about it as I carried it to the truck. We worked in silence for a while. He loaded a few bags, then stood by the unit, watching me. His silence was unsettling. As I picked up another bag, I noticed something sticking out of the side, a small, pale shape. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, but then I saw it was a finger. I froze, my heart pounding. The man must have noticed because he stepped toward me. "Keep working," he said, his voice low and cold. "What? What's in these bags?" I stammered, backing away. He pulled a knife from his jacket pocket and pointed it at me. I said, "Keep working." My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like jelly. He moved closer, the knife glinting in the dim light. "Look, I won't say anything, I swear," I said, my voice shaking. His eyes narrowed. "That's what the last guy said." Before he could get any closer, I dropped the bag and bolted. I ran as fast as I could, weaving between storage units. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I could hear him shouting behind me, his footsteps getting closer. I dove into the driver's seat, started the engine, and floored it. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. I drove straight home, locked all the doors, and stayed up all night, waiting for him to show up. But he didn't. The next morning, I tried to find the Craigslist ad again, but it was gone. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That I almost got paid $300 to move a bag with a human finger sticking out of it? I still don't know what was in those bags, or what would have happened if I'd stayed. But I've learned one thing: no amount of money is worth ignoring that little voice in your head that says, something isn't right. It was one of those late nights where I couldn't sleep. I had been scrolling through Craigslist, looking for something to pass the time. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just browsing. Then I saw it. "Free car, must pick up tonight." The description was brief. "Older car, runs, but needs some work. Don't have the space for it anymore. Free to anyone who wants it. Must pick up tonight." I don't know what drew me in, maybe it was the word free. I've always had a thing for old cars, and I figured I could fix it up or even sell it for parts if it was too much work. Plus, I had nothing else going on. I clicked on the ad, and there was a picture of the car, a rusty, faded sedan, parked under a street lamp. It wasn't pretty, but it had potential. And for free, that was hard to pass up. I hesitated for a moment, but the thought of getting something for nothing pushed me forward. I sent a message, "Still available?" I didn't expect a reply so quickly, but it came almost immediately. "Yes, it's here. Come by after 9 p.m. Just knock on the door when you arrive." The address wasn't too far, so I grabbed my keys and headed out. The car was located in a quiet, run-down neighborhood on the edge of town. I wasn't familiar with the area, but I figured it was nothing to worry about. I got to the street around 9:30 p.m. and parked in front of a house with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. It looked like no one had bothered to maintain the place for years. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, an older man opened it. He was tall and thin, wearing a loose, old jacket. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten properly in a while, and his eyes were sunken deep into his face. There was something about him that seemed off, but I pushed the thought aside. "You're here for the car?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "Yeah, saw your ad," I replied. "Looks like it's in decent shape, though it needs some work." He nodded. "Come in, it's in the back." I followed him down a narrow hallway, past rooms that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. The place was dim, lit only by a few weak lamps. I could hear the faint sound of what sounded like an old TV playing somewhere in the house. The man's movements were slow, almost deliberate. Finally, we reached the back of the house, and I saw the car parked behind a rusty gate. It looked like the one in the ad, old, a little banged up, but not beyond saving. I went over to it and started looking it over, checking the tires, the engine, and the body. "There's nothing wrong with it, just needs a little TLC," I said, trying to reassure myself. I could make it work. "That's good," the man replied, standing too close behind me. "I've had it for years, but I can't keep it anymore. It's time for someone else to take it." I glanced at him, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something in his tone that made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to just my imagination. I opened the driver's side door, and that's when I noticed something strange. The inside of the car was completely clean, too clean. It almost looked as if someone had just wiped it down with bleach. The seats were pristine, almost too perfect for a car of that age. I sat in the driver's seat, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread. "You sure you want it?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Yeah, it seems fine," I said, even though something didn't feel right. "I'll take it." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was tight and forced, like he was hiding something. "Good. Take it tonight, though. It has to be tonight." I didn't know what he meant by that, but the feeling of unease intensified. I decided I'd take the car, get out of there, and not think too much about it. I went back to my car and grabbed my keys, ready to head out. But before I could start the engine, the man appeared at my window. "You won't leave until you're done," he said, his voice now chillingly cold. "You can't leave." I froze. My heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile faded, and for a moment, his expression twisted into something dark. "You'll understand soon enough, or just take the car. It's yours now." I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to drive away, but another part felt like I was being pulled into something I didn't fully understand. I glanced back at the car, and that's when I noticed the rearview mirror. It wasn't right. It was covered in strange, dark smudges that looked like fingerprints. But they weren't just fingerprints. They looked like handprints, large and smudged, as if someone had touched it repeatedly with blood-stained hands. I looked around the car and it hit me. Something was wrong with this entire situation. I didn't know what, but I could feel it in my bones. Without saying anything, I turned the key in the ignition and sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I drove away, I felt an overwhelming urge to glance in the rearview mirror. I couldn't stop myself. In the mirror, I saw the man standing in the driveway, his eyes wide and wild, watching me. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. Then, for a split second, I thought I saw something in the back seat, a figure, pale and still, sitting in the shadows, just out of sight. I swerved, nearly crashing into a mailbox. The figure was gone, but the sense of dread didn't fade. I kept driving, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror every few minutes, but the car seemed fine, nothing out of the ordinary. That night, I went home and parked the car in my garage. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers started soon after. Faint sounds, like someone was speaking in a language I didn't recognize. And then, every night, I could hear something scratching at the back window, as if something was trying to get out. I didn't want to believe it, but I started to feel like the car wasn't mine anymore. I don't know if it's the car or something that came with it, but whatever it is, it won't leave me alone. I've tried to sell the car, but the ad always gets taken down before anyone calls. I've tried to park it at different places, but it always ends up back in my garage. And every time I look in the rearview mirror, I see him. The man, his face, watching me. I don't know what he wants, but I think he's waiting for me to give the car back. But I can't, because every time I try, the car refuses to leave.